Good evening. How are you? Well, it's comfortable out. A very slight rain. You can hear it coming against the trees. And it's been a very pleasant Sunday. Sometimes I have to force myself to relax and not read all the papers, but I'm compulsive about it. The largest problem we have is the division in America between those who will lie all the time about anything in opposition to any criticism of any sort of their leadership, and in particular, Trump. By now, they can't be willfully ignorant that this is a man who was a failed casino operator associated with mobsters, did unlawful practices in New York in his business, associated with people like Roy Cohn and other no-goods, made representations on loans in connection with casinos that proven to be false. He came out guns blazing when he came down the escalator in his home to tell us he was against immigrants, unless they were white, but not those that came from south of the border. And he had hateful things to say about many people, and refused to do anything involving security and intelligence at first. And I think that they didn't want to connect with a group of people that might then detect what they were doing even then with the Russians after the Russians helped them get elected. Now, there's been no surprises since, in the sense that Trump has continued to violate the law even after he won the office, or stole it. And now, after 2 impeachments, after he's left the White House, he managed to take all manner of documents that are top secret information, some of it compartmentalized. And I'm sure in the days ahead we'll know exactly what it is. When I say exactly, we'll know more particularly without divulging the information that might compromise our national security, which is why it was sealed and held protected in the first place. So Trump took this material from the White House and put it in his man cave at Mar-a-Lago, negotiated with the government to give back what he'd taken, but then didn't give it all. And apparently his lawyer, or lawyers, certified at one point that they had returned it all when they hadn't, and thus a search warrant. In response to the search warrant, instead of making legal arguments, if there are ones to be made, Trump has begun the campaign that he's best at, obstruction and lying. And he's raised the stakes in a dangerous way because he's inviting again people to be physical, to be irrational, to hurt other people, not to respect the law, not to trust that the system itself, even if this search warrant was compromised or wrong in some fashion or other, not to believe that any judge could possibly set it straight or that any argument could illuminate what its defects are. So we're left to believe that there are no defects, that the search was valid, it found things, and so now he claims that after the fact he can declassify it. It was a matter of law, that's nonsense. And I think we'll find that only in his imagination, as a thought experiment, did he decide, I could declassify it after he was caught with the goods, like a bad criminal. His fight, however, against the search warrant and the inevitable prosecution that should flow from seizing documents that plainly are possessed in violation of federal criminal law, lead them to say, go to the parapets and go after law enforcement, attacking the FBI and others. And there have been a couple of incidents involving violence. One fellow went to an FBI headquarters in Ohio, and as a result he ended up in a firefight and ended up dead. And another fellow today at 4 o'clock tried to charge the Capitol in his car, an event that had happened previously, and before they could arrest him or anything, apparently took his own life. So we see these people, cultists, who believe so much in the nonsense that Trump and his leadership gaggle tell people, that we've introduced violence into our system. And if you heard the talking heads at all, they say things like, oh, no, we shouldn't have this. We should be calm. Yes, and they talk out of both sides of their mouth. They say that, and then they do everything they can in an incendiary way to make everybody upset and violent and to do dangerous things, because he could not do it within the rule of law. That is, prove he should not be searched. He could not, within the rule of law, prove he didn't talk to the Secretary of State in Georgia. He could not prove within the rule of law that what he did in New York wasn't a crime. He could not do, within the rule of law, offer any proof that he did not lead, incite, and conduct in the most detailed fashion the effort to upend our government so that he could win an election that he had in fact lost by millions of votes. People are upset with me a little bit for pushing still on Garland. And it goes like this. You know, from the long look of a fella who has spent time as a prosecutor and a defense counsel and running investigations, what I know is that a search warrant obtains information. It's not an indictment. It's an effort to gather information. The same is true of subpoenas. So what is the action? Well, if I wanted to close this whole system down on the Florida thing, the government could issue a complaint based on the evidence they have after they inspect it, and I'm sure they are already, and they could, with a complaint, without an indictment, charge him, arrest him, set bail, and continue to work the case and issue an indictment later. They could do that in days. We did it all the time in the Southern District, even with complicated cases. But how complicated is it? You took the documents. They don't even have to be top secret. You can't declassify them afterwards. You're caught red-handed, and the best you can do is say, my lawyer acted on her own. I never told her to tell them that. This is the state of our affairs. So what we have to do is we have to encourage Garland to realize that he's going to be in a toe-to-toe fight, and not just in the courtroom, because this is going to be waged across the airwaves. And he has to fight both battles, and he does have one hand tied behind his back, because there are rules how he can fight that. But when things are said in public, there is the court system. And the pleadings that one writes can correspond to things that a politician might say that have nothing to do with the law, and for that reason should be addressed when we're trying to conduct a full and fair investigation that all indications are will result in the indictment of Mr. Trump. So there are people today writing stories saying the following: sure, maybe this would be an easy kill to prosecute Trump for these offenses involving confidential materials, but we cannot lose sight of the crime that is paramount, that must be charged, namely his effort to overthrow the government. If you're ranking them, there's no question that that's number one among the possible prosecutions. And some elements of those other prosecutions fold into and prove this one. For example, what happens in Georgia when he's telling the Secretary of State what he wants him to do to give him the votes. And we're told the Justice Department is investigating the false electors. So we have Eastman and Meadows and Congress people that can be summoned to testify, and they may or may not, can be prosecuted individually or in part of a conspiracy, and lean on these people. And day by day, we should be issuing subpoenas. We should be collecting information. We should be debriefing witnesses. And so my question is, given that we spent and wasted so much time, a year and 5 or 6 months, without doing anything, now that we're doing something, let's make it count, and let's realize that this cannot be a public relations show. This must be real. Garland must be in the fight. And I'm hopeful, given what he said in the last week, that we've awakened the younger prosecutor in him, and maybe he's ready for battle. And the time will tell. I hate that trite phrase, but it's true. And what it will tell is whether or not we're going to charge Trump. Because what happens when an investigation gets fixed is some subaltern gets prosecuted and not the real thief. So those are a couple of thoughts I have as I ponder the oncoming storm in Northern Virginia among my cathedral of trees. Thanks. Good talking to you. Bye-bye.